Rise of the European Emperor by Taishang Laonyo.
Chapter 631 Military Supply Drinks. After the production of Guangming milk powder, Marin sent a few bags to each of his nobles, which was considered as an advance advertisement. After all, in this era, it was the nobles who led the trend. In the absence of celebrities, the lifestyle of the nobles was the object of the whole society to follow and imitate. Of course, civilians can only imitate what is in accordance with the rules, and some transgressive things cannot be imitated casually. Of course, there are no rules for eating. As long as you have money to buy it, you can eat whatever you want except human flesh. Things like milk powder are actually powder after drying milk, which is not technically difficult. Others can make it as long as they think about it. Marin certainly knows this, but he is not worried about competitors. Why? Because others don't know how to seal and preserve milk powder. According to the rules of later generations, 400 grams of milk powder should be drunk within 2 weeks after unsealing. Otherwise, milk powder is easily spoiled by bacteria. Therefore, if the sterilization and sealing of ordinary milk powder are not done well, the milk powder will go bad within a month. And Marin can keep it for a very long time after high-temperature sterilization and sealing. According to the standards of later generations, the shelf life of milk powder is generally 18 to 24 months, and the longest is even 3 years. However, Marin felt that with his current earthy technology, it might not be preserved for that long. After all, he did not add any preservatives. Therefore, Marin decided to set the shelf life of milk powder to 1 year. In this way, it can be safer and avoid accidents. But even so, such a long shelf life is very scary. You know, the shelf life of fresh milk is only 3 days. If you don't drink it in time, it will go bad. Drinking bad milk is terrible, and there is no negotiation about diarrhea. Therefore, Marin's men expressed enough surprise at the shelf life of milk powder for up to 1 year. Especially Schwartz, he keenly discovered that milk powder has such a long shelf life that it can be used as military supplies. Of course, under the current conditions, it can only be used as supplies for officers. As for ordinary soldiers, they are not yet so luxurious that they can drink milk powder. Schwartz believes that milk powder can be used as supplies for officers. In addition to the long shelf life of milk powder, there is also a reason for convenience. Although Earl Grey milk tea tastes good, it needs to be boiled. Only those who have enough free time can wait slowly to boil milk tea. Moreover, tea is very expensive now. A tea brick can be exchanged for a war horse, which is really ridiculous. If it is used as military supplies, the cost will be too high. But milk powder is different. As long as you boil water and brew it directly, you can drink it quickly. Moreover, after adding sugar, the taste of milk powder is better than wine. There is another problem. During the war, officers are better not to drink alcohol to avoid missing the opportunity to fight. However, as an officer, you can't drink boiled water, that's too embarrassing. Therefore, this kind of milk powder that can be brewed has become the best drink for officers when they are thirsty. It tastes good, is easy to store, and is easy to carry and use. Is there any drink more suitable for officers than milk powder? Marin highly agreed with Schwartz's suggestion. Of course, this is only necessary to quit drinking during wartime. European mercenaries are used to drinking. If they are prohibited from drinking in peacetime, there will be a backlash. Therefore, Marin does not prohibit officers and soldiers from drinking, but strictly prohibits them from getting drunk. In peacetime, it is okay to let soldiers drink some beer. Beer is the national drink of Germany. However, during the war, drinking can easily cause trouble. Marin led troops to war several times, and alcohol was prohibited during the war. Schwartz also went to war many times and knew the difficulties of the soldiers. It is okay to let those soldiers drink boiled water during the war. Anyway, the soldiers have a low status and no human rights. But those officers with good backgrounds will feel embarrassed if they are asked to drink boiled water. Therefore, it is necessary to find a non-alcoholic beverage for them. The characteristics of milk powder that are durable, portable and easy to use have become the first choice of officers during wartime. Marin has no objection to this, and approved Schwartz's suggestion, intending to take out a batch of milk powder as a special supply for officers during wartime. However, in order to prevent the milk powder from spoiling, Marin specially used 400-gram packages. Because if the package is too large, it will take longer to drink after unsealing, and it will be easier for the milk powder to deteriorate. The 400-gram package is just right. After unsealing, as long as it is drunk within 2 weeks, it will be just right. Therefore, Marin used 400-gram packages and noted on the oil paper bag dash, it is best to drink it within 2 weeks after unsealing to avoid deterioration. In fact, Marin prefers to make coffee a military beverage. Because coffee can refresh, it is good for officers to drink coffee during the day. However, for the time being, the planting and production of coffee are monopolized by the Arabs. It was not until 1570 that the Turks left a bag of coffee seeds when they retreated during the siege of Vienna, which caused coffee to flow to Europe. Therefore, even if Marin wants to get coffee now, it is difficult to get it, and even if he gets it, the price is very expensive. Because, in the Arab region, coffee is still used as medicine. The problem of tea is similar to that of coffee. Tea is now far away in China. Even if it is successfully introduced, it will take several years to grow and provide products. Therefore, at this stage, milk powder is really the best military beverage, specially supplied to officers. However, for the sake of future development plans, Marin decided not only to go to Daming to get tea tree seeds, but also to get coffee seeds. For this reason, Marin decided to send spies to the Arab region to privately purchase coffee seeds at a high price. Then, take them to the tropical regions of America for planting. Turkey is hostile to Europe, but the Mamluk dynasty in Egypt is not very hostile to Europe. As long as you send people to Egypt to spend a lot of money, you can still get coffee seeds. As for tea, there is no need to talk about it. As long as you open up trade with Daming, it is still easy to get. As long as you can land on the land of Daming and offer a reward of 1,000 taels of silver in private, there are many people willing to offer tea tree seeds, and even some tea farmers can be obtained. Marin was planning to occupy Taiwan Island as a foothold anyway, and the climate and terrain of Taiwan Island were very suitable for growing tea. The requirements for tea trees are hilly areas, subtropical or tropical climate, sufficient precipitation, and good drainage. It just so happened that Taiwan Island met the requirements. The terrain on the island was undulating, there were many hills, and it was very suitable for growing tea. In later generations, Taiwan Island's oolong tea and high mountain tea were very famous. When tea planting on Taiwan Island developed, it would be absolutely smooth sailing to bring tea tree seeds and tea farmers to America to open up new tea gardens. In short, Marin wanted Europeans to live a good life of drinking coffee and tea every day early. However, for now, drinking instant milk powder seems to be more realistic. Therefore, the military beverage currently supplied exclusively to officers can only be the milk powder with the lowest cost. Well, it is Guangming milk powder packaged in oil paper. Chapter 632, Spring Farming, Urgent Need for Labor. Don't think it's ridiculous to use milk powder as a military beverage, but in fact, that was the case in European society at that time. In the absence of other mass-produced beverages, although milk tea is good, tea is too expensive and scarce now, and is not suitable as a military supply, milk powder is indeed a very good beverage for officers. Because, at that time, Europe was a strictly hierarchical society. If officers and soldiers were treated the same, it would be a violation of the rules. Not only would it be opposed by the nobles and officers, but it would also make ordinary soldiers lose their ambition. If officers and soldiers were treated similarly, who would work hard to make merit, seek promotion and become an officer noble? At the beginning, Marin had shared the joys and sorrows with his first batch of men, eating and living together. There was no problem, because Marin was just a knight at the time. His men were all recruits, and they didn't think there was anything wrong. However, with the improvement of status and a large number of noble children becoming officers under Marin, if Marin wants to pursue equality again, then the officers under him will not be happy. First we worked hard to become officers, is it to get the same treatment as those mud-legged soldiers? And the role of officers is very important on the battlefield. Therefore, later Marin gradually changed the view of treating everyone equally in his previous life, and did not eat and live with the soldiers. Those officers were treated differently from ordinary soldiers. For example, ordinary soldiers eat black bread and occasionally eat some salted fish and meat. But officers basically eat meat continuously, and can drink wine in non-wartime. Marin was worried that the soldiers would have opinions, but in the end he found out that the soldiers thought it was natural. On the contrary, if the officers and soldiers were treated the same, everyone would find it strange. Marin could not challenge the entire social system and finally acquiesced to the existence of hierarchy. Besides, he is also a beneficiary of the existence of hierarchy, so why go against it? The lifestyle of the nobles and officers of this era can only be described by the words of concubine Hua dash, bitch is hypocritical. In order to show their status, nobles and officers would wear more shining armor and clothes to show their difference from ordinary soldiers. For meals, they had meat or salted fish for every meal. Meat could not be eaten during the fasting period, only fish could be eaten. Even the drinks were very particular. For example, even if the noble officers drank the German national drink, beer, they must drink better beer brewed with hops, and would never touch the kind of rotten civilian beer. Some more sophisticated noble officers even only drank wine, not beer, to show their nobility. However, in wartime, drinking was not allowed in the strict military discipline of the Marin army. Moreover, drinking raw water was not allowed, but boiled water was uniformly drunk. This point once caused strong protests from noble officers. Because, in their view, drinking boiled water like the mud-legged soldiers was a disgraceful behavior. However, Marin could not find other non-alcoholic beverages. By the way, at that time, Europeans regarded wine and beer as daily drinks and never drank boiled water, so he could only do that for now. This time, Marin came up with this kind of milk powder that is very suitable for carrying and easy to store. Although it is a bit out of tune, the careful Schwartz immediately listed it as a military drink exclusively for officers, which can be regarded as satisfying the officers' need for privileges. Sure enough, after the delicious milk powder was launched, although those officers may not all like the milk powder, they finally felt face-saving. At least, they don't have to drink boiled water with the big-headed soldiers. That would be too face-losing. Although Marin muttered in his heart that those guys were too hypocritical, he was unwilling to fight the general trend alone, so he acquiesced to this situation. Anyway, as long as those officers are satisfied. Moreover, the cost of milk powder is not high. As for those big-headed soldiers, they didn't think much, because, in their opinion, officers should be treated well. As time passed, the time entered March. At this time, spring plowing was also carried out vigorously in the Grand Duchy of the North Sea. However, there were some problems with spring plowing. East Frisia, Oldenburg, Schleswig and North Munster, which were areas that Marin had controlled for a long time, had no problems with spring plowing because they were well prepared and had sufficient labor. The main problem was West Frisia, Bremen and Jutland, which were only included in the scope of rule at the end of last year. Why? Because these three new provinces have enough land and oxen, but they are seriously lacking in manpower. Therefore, the spring plowing in these three new provinces was seriously affected. Without enough people, there is no way to control those oxen. In this case, no matter how much arable land Marin has, it is useless. After all, oxen will not pull the plow to plow the land by themselves. People are always needed to support the plow and control the direction, and they must be strong laborers. Generally, old people and women cannot support the plow head, which is a physical job. In this era without agricultural machinery, agricultural production and labor determine everything. Therefore, even though Marin obtained many manors in the three new regions of West Frisia, Bremen and Jutland, and his men were also allocated a lot of new land. However, this year's spring plowing cannot be fully reclaimed due to insufficient preparation. In fact, in the South Munster area, there are tens of thousands of prisoners of war digging canals there at this time. If Marin is willing, he can bring all those tens of thousands of prisoners of war to spring plowing. However, the problem is that these tens of thousands of prisoners of war, those soldiers, will be returned to Switzerland, Brandenburg and Saxony after the canal is dug. It is no problem to bring them to spring plowing, but the secrets of putting nose rings on cattle and using curved plows will definitely be taken away by these people. And this is not in line with Marin's principle of confidentiality. Therefore, Marin would rather endure the problem of labor shortage than transfer tens of thousands of prisoners of war digging canals in the South Munster area to help with spring plowing. There is no other reason, just to keep the advanced agricultural technology secret. Moreover, the canal in the South Munster area is also extremely important to Marin. Once the canal is dug, Marin can reach back to his hometown, the Ruhr area. Then, it will be convenient to control the Ruhr area. At the same time, it is also much more convenient to transport coal from the Ruhr area. Therefore, whether from the perspective of confidentiality or strategy, Marin cannot call on the tens of thousands of prisoners of war who dug the canal in the South Munster area. After all, those prisoners of war have to be returned. In desperation, Marin and his noble officers can only endure the situation that some fiefs have no output this year. In this way, Marin and his nobles and officers can only focus on the present and first solve the spring plowing problem of the manors in East Frisia, Oldenburg and Schleswig, North Munster province. Marin did not give it to his men because the population there is small and the development is not high. Then, if the spring plowing ends early, people can be sent to the fiefs of the 3 new provinces to see if they can catch up with the last wave of spring plowing and cultivate as much as they can. Moreover, in order to save costs, Marin decided to grant his nobles the power to recruit serfs on their own, and encourage them to send people to the inland areas of Germany to recruit serfs and enrich their fiefdoms. Anyway, the fiefdoms of those nobles do not have to pay taxes. Those serfs are also supported by those nobles. Although Marin had recruited a large number of people from the inland before, they were divided up by everyone. As a result, he did not have enough manpower. Since the 3 new provinces were incorporated into his hands, and Marin specially sealed some of the fiefdoms of many nobles to the Jutland Peninsula. Now, including Marin, all the nobles in East Frisia who have fiefdoms in the 3 new provinces are very short of labor. Among them, Marin, as the largest landlord, has many manors that are simply empty, with few people, which is very wasteful. Therefore, Marin is the largest landlord in the North Sea Principality that lacks labor the most. However, Marin felt very tired after going to the south to recruit labor and then sharing it with his men after returning. Therefore, this time, under Kohler's suggestion, Marin decided to grant the nobles who had fiefs in the 3 new provinces the power to recruit serfs on their own. After all, one person's plan is short, and many people's plan is long. It is better for everyone to mobilize than for Marin to work hard to recruit people alone and share with these guys. You know, Marin is the one who lacks serfs the most. Why should he share people with everyone? In this way, as soon as this policy came out, Marin was equivalent to getting rid of a burden. In the future, the serfs recruited by Kohler will belong entirely to Marin's own manor. As for other nobles, everyone shows their magical powers across the sea. Anyway, no matter what means they use, Marin doesn't care. Everyone relies on their own means. Whoever can dig enough people can develop the newly sealed land of each family. Of course, Marin drew a red line for them. It is forbidden to recruit private soldiers in the name of recruiting serfs. Marin doesn't care about the rest. Even if they cheated people from other vassal states, Marin would pretend not to know. As long as it's not clear, it's fine. In addition, you can't poach people from other manors in the country. After all, most of the manors in the country are under Marin's name. Poaching people in the country is equivalent to poaching Marin's corners. What Marin didn't expect was that because of his policy, his nobles were fully fired and used all means to poach people from other vassal states. Even a grey industrial chain was created: human trafficking. Unlike ordinary human trafficking generally targets women and children. The human trafficking jointly created by Marin's men was actually aimed at young and strong men, which was very strange. However, who said that the Grand Duchy of the North Sea was too short of labor? Later, Marin even turned to this underground organization that trafficked young and strong men to obtain enough labor. After all, this organization is very good at poaching people, and can fool the strong serfs who work well in other people's manors away, and the means are very good. Before, Marin could only recruit those young and strong Germans who had no work to do. However, such people are limited after all. And this organization that traffics young and strong men can directly poach people from manors in other countries, expanding the source of labor. At least, it is much wider than the source of population recruited by Kohler's men. Because serfs with work to do make up the majority of the German population. Chapter 633, Picking the Great Chain. While organizing the spring plowing, Marin did not stop transporting troops to Newcastle. Danish pirates have been hired by Marin to launch attacks on the southeast coast of England and attracted the attention of the English navy. And the ships under Marin's command began to circle quietly in the North Sea and then transported the soldiers to Newcastle. In fact, Marin can temporarily put the 20,000 troops to be shipped to England into spring plowing. After all, these warriors are all farmers' children, and they can cultivate the land and do farm work. However, the action to seize England is very important. Therefore, Marin resisted the temptation and insisted on transporting the 20,000 troops to Newcastle in batches. Because, in Marin's view, now he has too much food in his hands to eat, and it is difficult to sell it, so he is forced to make wine and sell it. Therefore, the problem of spring plowing in the 3 newly acquired provinces is not so urgent. At most, collect less food. Moreover, because the 3 provinces were acquired not long ago at the end of last year, Marin did not even have time to build large-scale fertilizer processing plants in the 3 new provinces of West Frisia, Bremen and Jutland. Without enough fertilizer, even if all the newly acquired land was cultivated in the spring, the income would not be high. Therefore, it became leisurely to temporarily give up the spring plowing this year and build a fertilizer processing plant first. After all, there is plenty of time now. The key to the fertilizer processing plant is the unified collection and processing of residents' feces. It takes several months to dissipate the stench of feces and make fertilizer cakes with little smell. Then, it was crushed, and then phosphate rock powder brought back from Western Sahara and potash salt brought back from the Harz Mountains were added. In this way, a mixed fertilizer containing the 3 main fertilizers of nitrogen fertilizer, feces, phosphate fertilizer, phosphate rock powder, and potash fertilizer, potash salt, was born. Using a mixed fertilizer with all 3 main fertilizers, the rye yield per acre can be increased to 400 or 500 pounds per acre, which is a completely primitive farming method in Europe. Moreover, the spring plowing presided over by Marin was not that simple. The traditional Germanic spring plowing was nothing more than plowing the land with a light plow or a Saxon heavy plow pulled by several horses, loosening the soil, and then sowing rye seeds. After that, watering it, it was okay. If the land was irrigated with good water by the river, it might be possible to use a water wheel. European water wheel technology is quite advanced, to irrigate it well. But if it was far away from the river, it would depend on the weather. The serfs would at most pick up the sky water and sow it on the day when they sowed the rye seeds. Next, just ignore it. Fortunately, rye is as tenacious as weeds and can survive like a cockroach. If it is wheat that requires a lot of water, it is impossible to grow it far away from the river. Therefore, in the current German region, rye is the mainstream. As for wheat, even in the warmer south, it is mainly grown in irrigated land by the big river in the river valley. Because water wheels can provide enough irrigation water. But how precious and rare is the irrigated land by the big river. Therefore, the amount of wheat planted in Germany is very small. In terms of price, it is also 5 times that of rye. Because the Arabs' ditch irrigation technology was introduced to southern Italy, there are more wheat planting areas. The perfect irrigation system and fertile volcanic ash soil make southern Italy a golden area in the eyes of Europeans. And Sicily, because it is rich in durum wheat used for making pasta, is praised by Europeans as the Golden Basin. It is not so easy for Marin to farm on the land in the 3 new provinces. In addition to using mixed fertilizers that combine the 3 major fertilizers, Marin also needs to dig a large number of ditches and trenches in the fields to divert water for irrigation. The ditch is the main channel for water diversion, and the trench is the key to flooding the wheat field. In the wheat field, there is a shallow trench every few meters. During irrigation, the water flows into the trench. Because the trenches between each ridge are only a few meters apart, the irrigation water introduced into the trench can penetrate into the roots of the wheat and let it drink enough water. Of course, the most critical part of irrigation is actually when the wheat is just planted, when the water demand is the highest. Only when the humidity is high enough can the wheat germinate and grow better. Although rye is not as delicate as wheat and does not require much water. However, if there is enough irrigation water, it can also promote the increase in yield. However, although this irrigation technology is now available, it is a pity that a large number of ditches and trenches need to be dug, and the workload is very large. Therefore, even if Malin now has enough labor to develop the 3 new provinces, it is too late to dig ditches and soil ditches. On the contrary, with this year's buffer, in the months from the end of spring plowing to the autumn harvest, Malin can fully organize the idle young labor in the old provinces to dig ditches and soil ditches in the 3 new provinces. By next spring, the new ditches and soil ditches will be put into use. In addition, the fertilizer processing plant can also provide a large amount of mixed fertilizer, so it would be strange if there is no increase in production. In his previous life, Malin's father told Malin that in the era without excavators, after the founding of the People's Republic of China, the country organized farmers many times to use the slack season, mainly winter, to concentrate on agricultural, major battles, specifically taking advantage of this time to dig ditches and ditches to facilitate irrigation. This kind of battle of digging ditches and ditches is also called jiaodachin in Ma Lin's hometown. It is an extremely labor-intensive activity, and generally only men are conscripted. The reason why it is called jiaodachin is that when digging the river, the soil was placed in baskets for the men to carry and climb up the river bank. Therefore, it is called jiaodachin. As for the word chin, it means attendance. Because in that era, the work point system was used, and attendance was calculated as work points. Digging the river was a matter of great effort, so it was called dachin. And the soil was all carried to the river bank by manpower, so it was also called jiaodachin. In the era without excavators and muck trucks, all irrigation rivers were basically dug out by jiaodachin. In the Jianghuai area where Ma Lin lived in his previous life, because there were 2 crops a year and rice and wheat were planted in rotation, only winter was considered to be a slack season. And jiaodachin was generally organized in winter. It is said that jiaodachin is particularly hard. In the cold climate of the cold winter, the farmers were sweating all over because of the high labor intensity. Many people took off their cotton clothes and only wore single clothes to carry soil. Moreover, at this time, the men were particularly good at eating, and it was normal for one person to eat several bowls of rice. Because they also consumed a lot. In addition, there was a lack of meat and oil at the time, and without a few bowls of brown rice, it was impossible to sustain it. If Marin wanted to develop and utilize the land of the Grand Duchy of the North Sea, he could not do without this jiaodachin model. Why? Because only this kind of jiaodachin, that organized a large number of laborers, can dig ditches and canals, mainly digging irrigation rivers, such as digging large-scale projects such as the Red Flag Canal. If it were normal times, which farmer would dig a river for nothing? Even a manor would not be able to do it. Therefore, major events such as digging irrigation rivers must be organized by the official organization to be done. Of course, things like digging small irrigation ditches and ditches are not difficult, and each manor can organize its own labor force to do it. Of course, organizing jiaodachin to dig irrigation rivers must provide enough food for the labor force, which is much more than usual. Otherwise, young and strong men can't stand it. Why did Emperor Yang of Sui die so many people when he dug the Grand Canal? It's not that they didn't give them food, but that the amount they gave was too little. When digging the canal, the laborers ate several times more than usual. If they were only given the same amount of food as when they stayed at home, they would have used up all their energy in half a day. Then, the supervisors didn't understand. After all, the supervisors sent by the government didn't have to work themselves, so they couldn't experience that kind of feeling, and thought the farmers were being lazy. In fact, they had used up all their energy, and whipping them was useless. Without the provision of double food and the pressure from the supervisors, so many people died in the excavation of the Grand Canal. Or maybe this was a mistake made by an outsider. After all, no one wants so many people to die while digging the river. Marin guessed that it was probably because some ignorant civil servant allocated less food and it was not enough for consumption, so many people died. After all, the excavation of the Grand Canal was in a temperate zone, and there was no such harsh climate as the excavation of the Panama Canal. It is unlikely that the epidemic caused large-scale deaths. It can only be the lack of food, coupled with the high intensity of labor, which exhausted people to death. By the way, in the last century, rural people not only had poor living conditions, but also had a lot of corvée such as tiandachin, which basically existed every year. Therefore, parents in rural areas in that era often warned their children who went to school like this: if you want to get into college, you don't have to be tired like a dead dog to pick up the big work. Therefore, many rural students in that era worked very hard just to get rid of this miserable fate. However, now that the countryside is mechanized, there are not so many troubles. Then, the rural students nowadays don't study as hard as they did back then, and their grades are not as outstanding as those of urban students. It is said that the rural students back then could study themselves to the point of becoming sick, and they were extremely hardworking, literally risking their lives to study. Therefore, in the last century, there were a lot of golden phoenixes in the countryside. But now there are not many, because the difference between urban and rural areas has faded, and rural people don't have to risk their lives to live a good life, and they don't have to burn their lives to study. Therefore, some uninformed idiots say that it is difficult for poor families to produce noble children, but in fact it is mainly because rural students don't waste their lives to study, because they can also make a lot of money by working. Chapter 634, The Advice of Princess Margaret. If someone looks carefully at the enlarged satellite map, they will find a phenomenon, that is, agriculturally developed areas are generally crisscrossed with ditches, and they are very regular. Those rivers cut the agriculturally developed areas into small squares, which are very neat. To describe it in one word, it is gridization. Under the leadership of Marin, East Frisia now uses a large number of laborers to dig irrigation rivers during the slack season, and has initially realized the gridization of ditches. Therefore, agriculture in East Frisia is now very developed. However, this is difficult to replicate. It is not that merchants from other principalities have discovered the secret of digging many irrigation rivers in East Frisia. However, it is useless to discover it. You know, digging irrigation rivers is a huge project, and generally thousands or even tens of thousands of strong men are organized to participate. The large number of people is not a big deal, but the food consumption when digging the river is several times that of usual times, which is a big problem. Food is so expensive in Europe now. Even if the strong men digging the river do not want wages, the consumption of food is really painful. For example, if a strong man does not work much, it is enough to eat more than 1 pound of food a day. If he eats more than 2 pounds, he is considered a big eater because the consumption is not large. But if it is a situation like digging a river, the appetite of those strong men will increase sharply. Generally, strong men can eat more than 3 pounds of food, which is very consuming. So, 10,000 strong men consume more than 30,000 pounds of food every day when digging a river. If converted into Rai, it would cost 30,000 pfennigs, which is equivalent to 500 gold coins. If it takes a month to dig, but the consumption of food, it will cost 15,000 gold coins. Too exaggerated. Of course, the food for farmers digging rivers cannot be whole wheat. For ordinary nobles, it may be mixed with a lot of soil, wild vegetables, sawdust and even stones. Eating stones can make your teeth go awry. That kind of bread is very hard because it is mixed with too much soil, and it can be used as a brick to hit people. The bread given by Marin is better, soft, but it is also mixed with about 30% of ryegrass chaff. At the beginning, Kohler strongly requested to promote this Kohler bread mixed with straw bran because he felt sorry for the huge consumption of food. If 30% of the 3 pounds of food for each strong man every day is straw bran, then 0.9 pounds of rye can be saved. For 10,000 strong men, 9,000 pounds of rye can be saved every day, which is 9,000 pfennigs or 150 gold coins. So, Marin agreed to Kohler's use of this somewhat unethical bread. However, having said that, this Kohler bread mixed with 30% straw bran is already a conscience food for the poor. After all, it is not chewy and easy to digest. Moreover, coarse grains are also nutritious, at least much better than mixed with soil and stones. Although those black-hearted nobles mixed a lot of messy things in the bread, they can save a lot of food. However, in any case, it took a month to organize tens of thousands of people to dig the river, and the food cost invested was also worth several thousand gold coins. But the problem is that most of the German nobles can't afford such consumption. After all, most of the nobles are in debt, so where can they get the money to organize the men to dig rivers on a large scale? Marin is different. Because he has mastered the secret of high grain yield, Marin has plenty of food to supply the men to eat when digging rivers. Therefore, the construction of water conservancy in East Frisia is very smooth. Now, many rivers have been dug in the 3 regions of Oldenburg, Schleswig and North Munster for irrigation. Even if other nobles want to imitate, they must have the financial resources and courage. Because of the tight time, starting from March, spring plowing in the Great Duchy of the North can only give priority to East Frisia, Oldenburg, Schleswig and North Munster. As for the newly joined West Frisia, Bremen and Jutland, as well as South Munster, which is not under Marin's control, Marin can only give up temporarily and let them do it according to the original extensive farming method. It is not necessary to ask these places to have high grain yields, as long as they do not need Marin's assistance. Just when Marin was busy with spring plowing, intelligence suddenly came from England. Henry VII was planning to send troops to the north to reoccupy several northern counties. Even the military camps were built and food supplies began to gather. When the spring plowing was over, the civilians could be drawn to join the army, and Henry VII would immediately march north to reoccupy the north. The intelligence came from the Countess of Salisbury, Edward's sister, Princess Margaret. Before, Princess Margaret had not discovered this situation. After all, Henry VII had not made any preparations before, but just discussed it with several important ministers under his command. In fact, Princess Margaret's husband, Sir Richard Pole, as a close confidant of Henry VII, knew about the plan to send troops. Unfortunately, Richard Pole and his wife Margaret were not of the same mind, and he was also on guard against his wife. Therefore, Princess Margaret had no idea about Henry VII's plan to send troops to the north. However, after the beginning of spring, Henry VII began to gather troops and food, and the movement was too loud, so it was difficult to hide it. Princess Margaret felt something was wrong, so she sent people to investigate and spent a huge price to finally learn the news that Henry VII was about to march north. According to Henry VII's plan, the British Army will send 15,000 troops to the north, bypassing the central counties of Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, and Lincolnshire, which were messed up by bandits and refugees, and go directly north from the counties in the west of England to avoid missing the opportunity. As for where the army gathered, it was Warwickshire, southwest of Leicestershire. Ironically, according to the law, Warwickshire should have been the fief of Edward, Earl of Warwick. And that Edward, Earl of Warwick, was Edward who was now preparing to kill Henry VII. Henry VII had imprisoned Edward for more than 10 years, and naturally deprived Edward of his fiefdom and sent his own confidants to take over. Therefore, although Warwickshire was Edward's fiefdom, it was now Henry VII's territory and the location of the rear camp of Henry VII's army heading north. Although because of spring plowing, neither English soldiers nor civilians could be mobilized. However, Henry VII still mobilized a group of non-farmers, such as shepherds, to build camps in Warwickshire and transport food and grass. When the spring plowing was over, the British soldiers and civilians recruited from all over the country could live directly in the repaired camp, and the food could be directly prepared by Henry VII. According to Margaret's estimate, the camp in Warwickshire would be repaired by the end of March. In addition, according to secret intelligence, the food and grass needed by the British Army would be basically in place by the end of March, waiting for the British Army to come and use it. Margaret knew that Robin Hood's bandits had a relationship with Marin, and she also knew that Marin and Edward's army would also launch an attack in early May. However, in order to make Edward's military operations smoother, Margaret believed that Robin Hood's bandits should be sent to sneak attack the British camp in Warwickshire and burn the food and grass before the British army assembled. Moreover, the best time was in late April, on the eve of the British Army's assembly. In this way, the British Army had to raise food and grass again, and military operations would be greatly delayed. But Edward's army will go south as scheduled. One is well prepared, the other is not. Even a fool knows who will win. Marin was surprised by the intelligence of Margaret. Of course, he was even more surprised by Margaret's suggestion. She is clearly a capable female politician. She actually knew to destroy the food and grass prepared by Henry VII. This is the vision that only ancient Chinese counselors had. Robin Hood's band of thieves now has an estimated 7,000 to 8,000 formal members, all of whom are young and strong men. Moreover, there is a 900-man cavalry. If it is just to burn the food and grass before the British army gathers, sending out the 900-man cavalry is the best choice. Therefore, Marin gave a positive answer to Margaret's suggestion, and sent people to order the Robin Hood thieves to start exploring and prepare for the British camp in Warwickshire, Banshee. At the same time, Marin would prepare the oil barrels needed to burn the grain and grass for them. Pouring the oil on the grain and grass would burn faster. However, through this suggestion, Marin was more afraid of Margaret. It is certain that when Edward comes to power in the future, Margaret, Edward's sister, will become a superstar in the English court. This is not a good thing for Marin to control England in the future. Therefore, Marin wanted to kill Margaret, a smart woman. Of course, Marin would not send someone to assassinate Margaret himself. In fact, as long as he sent someone to tell Henry VII what Margaret had done, Henry VII would definitely cut her. Apart from anything else, if Henry VII knew that Edward was replaced by someone sent by Princess Margaret, he would definitely be extremely angry, and he would probably even think of crushing Princess Margaret to ashes. Chapter 635 begins to lure the tiger away from the mountain. Marin was almost certain that once Edward succeeded in becoming the King of England, his sister, Princess Margaret, would become a powerful figure like Princess Taiping. Princess Taiping, like Princess Margaret, was resourceful, and she also made great contributions to the restoration of Li Tang and the killing of Empress Wei. Similarly, Princess Margaret also made great contributions in Edward's fight for the throne. It can be imagined that after Edward became king, he would definitely rely on his sister, Princess Margaret, rather than Marin, an outsider. At that time, Princess Margaret would inevitably become a powerful figure who invaded the court and the country like Princess Taiping after Li Dan was restored to the throne. At that time, Princess Margaret would most likely interfere in the marriage of Edward's daughter, Princess Margaret. Maybe, she would let her son marry Princess Margaret. Because, then the throne would belong to her son. Even if she didn't do this, if something happened to her brother Edward, the regent would be Princess Margaret, the aunt of Princess Margaret, who had status and ability. Marin wanted to help his daughter-in-law as regent, but he probably couldn't do it. So, from the point of view of Marin's control of England, a female ambitious person with status and ability like Princess Margaret must be eliminated. Otherwise, Marin would have no idea of seizing the regency of England. Even Caesar and Princess Margaret's marriage might not be maintained. Moreover, Marin was worried that Princess Margaret would murder Princess Margaret. Why? Because Edward now only has Princess Margaret, his biological sister, alive. Once Edward dies and Princess Margaret also has an accident, then according to the inheritance law, it must be Princess Margaret's eldest son Henry Bull who will inherit the throne. If Edward died, but Princess Margaret was alive, and Caesar Jr. was engaged to Princess Margaret, then, for her own benefit and for the sake of her son, Princess Margaret would most likely murder her little niece. After all, there has been no family affection in the royal family since ancient times. Therefore, no matter from which aspect, Marin seemed to have the need to get rid of Princess Margaret. And using a knife to kill someone, and then killing Princess Margaret with the hands of Henry VII, seems to be the best approach. Of course, for now, this woman is still useful. Therefore, Marin decided to send someone to inform Henry VII and expose Princess Margaret later. For this reason, Marin sent his men to ask Princess Margaret for the distribution map of the English army garrison. Princess Margaret has been operating in England for many years, and this information can still be obtained. In addition to her ability and financial resources to inquire about intelligence, her husband Richard Pole is a general under Henry VII, and it is not difficult to get this kind of information. Moreover, Marin also hoped that Princess Margaret could find a group of warriors to help open the gates of London when his army was at the gates of the city, including London. Of course, Marin would not rely on her alone. While asking Princess Margaret to prepare manpower, Marin would also ask the London branch of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce under his command to prepare manpower to open the city wall with internal and external cooperation. Marin's plan was to send the men of the North Sea Chamber of Commerce to inform before the siege and sell Princess Margaret to Henry VII. Henry VII would definitely kill Princess Margaret in a rage. Moreover, it is very likely that the news that Princess Margaret was preparing people to help open the city gate would also be dug out. By then, Henry VII would catch the inside ghost and naturally would not think that there was another group of people who also planned to open the city gate. Without any precautions, the North Sea Chamber of Commerce could easily succeed. In order to ensure success, Marin had ordered the North Sea Chamber of Commerce to buy several yards near the London city gate and dig basements to hide ambushes and weapons and armor. When the army surrounded the city, the people hiding in the basements would put on plate armor and swords and shields, rush to the inside of the city gate, and then open the city gate in the middle of the night. This was the plan on land, and on the sea, Marin's plans also worked. While Marin and Princess Margaret were communicating and planning to plot the food and grass of the British Army's rear camp, the spies sent by Marin had successfully set up the so-called Chamber of Commerce office in the 5 major ports of England: Hastings, New Romney, Hayes, Dover, Sandwich, also known as Sandwich City, and placed some large orders, asking the large merchant ships of the 5 ports alliance, especially the large merchant ships that often serve as warships, to help transport some goods and paid a lot of money. As a result, the Chamber of Commerce branch, established by Marin at the dock of the 5 Ports Alliance, has been successfully established and has gained the trust of most ship owners. Sometimes, trust is so simple. As long as you complete a business cooperation happily, the other party's trust in you will be established. Of course, in later generations, this is also a common trick of liars: first use 1 or 2 perfect cooperations to deceive your trust. For the last time, the next big order will cheat you out of all your money. However, in this era, this kind of clever trick has not appeared yet. How could the simple British ship owners in the early 16th century think that there would be such bad people? So, they don't know that they have been calculated. Based on the very successful first cooperation, the persons in charge of the so-called Italian Chamber of Commerce branch or Dutch Chamber of Commerce branch at the Five Ports Alliance dock have gained the trust of most of the ship owners of the Five Ports Alliance. This time, these Chamber of Commerce branches placed a big order and requested most of the large merchant ships of the Five Ports Alliance to help those chambers of commerce transport a batch of materials to Italy or the Baltic Sea region. Both are relatively far away places. Moreover, the persons in charge of these Chamber of Commerce branches are extremely happy. As soon as the ship owners agreed, they directly offered a 30% deposit. Such a generous style aroused great favor among the ship owners of the Five Ports Alliance. In this way, except for a few ships that needed to go to the Irish Sea for rotation, most of the other large merchant ships that would be recruited as warships during wartime received large orders from those foreign Chamber of Commerce branches. With good credit, the freight was 20% higher than ordinary sailing. However, the other party required that in order to ensure safety, it was necessary to bring enough capable sailors to prevent pirates from robbing at sea. As for why this request was made, it was naturally to cut off the firewood from the bottom of the pot and take away all the capable sailors in England first. Those merchant ships did not have fixed sailors. Because of the developed shipping, the five ports of Hastings, New Romney, Hayes, Dover, and Sandwich, also known as Sandwich City, gathered a large number of merchant ships and sailors. However, due to cost considerations, those merchant ships usually did not support a large number of sailors. Because that would be too expensive. Therefore, those ship owners generally only support core figures such as the captain, the first mate, the navigator, and a few trusted sailors who can fight and serve as bodyguards. Most of the other sailors were temporarily recruited in the taverns at the port before departure. Those sailors, like temporary hired workers, usually drink some low-quality beer in the taverns at the port and brag by the way. The taverns at the port seem to have become a labor market for sailors. Whenever a ship is about to depart, the ship owner will come in person or ask the captain to come to the tavern to recruit sailors to follow the ship. Of course, among these temporarily hired sailors, there are high-priced veterans, that is, those with good sailing skills and relatively good fighting, and there are also cheap new ones. And those high-priced veterans are often the excellent sailors that the English Navy recruits first when it is fighting. Therefore, Marin asked his men to pay a high price, just to let those ship owners take away those experienced and combative sailors. In this way, when his fleet raided the Irish Sea, it would encounter less resistance. It is March now. It takes about 1 or 2 months to go to Italy or the Baltic Sea. It happens that they will return in May. By then, the French fleet crossing the Channel will encounter these returning ships with a large number of experienced sailors. Under the trend of money, most of the large merchant ships of the Five Ports Alliance accepted the orders and took many experienced sailors to go to sea. And the persons in charge of the so-called Foreign Chamber of Commerce branches also sent intelligence back to the local headquarters: the tiger has left the mountain. Chapter 636, Changing Guns. The war was about to break out. In addition to urging all places to speed up spring plowing, Marin was constantly adjusting the tactics and methods against the British Army and replacing some weapons. The English army was very different from the armies on the European continent, so Marin needed to change some tactics. For example, for the musketeer troops, Marin planned to equip the front-row musketeers with breastplate armor and helmets. Because, in the battle, the large number of longbowmen in England would definitely rain arrows. If you don't wear breastplate armor and helmets, it is easy to be shot into a hedgehog by the English longbowmen. Because the shooting speed of the musketeers is far behind that of the English longbowmen. In addition to the first 3 rows of musketeers and spearmen wearing breastplate armor and iron helmets, Marin also planned to give iron helmets to the soldiers in the back row. This is because the English longbowmen like to projectile, and the probability of arrows hitting the head is very high. In order to prevent excessive casualties, Marin allocated a large number of helmets from other armies for the English expeditionary force. In addition, Marin has begun to replace musketeers with musketeers in a planned manner. That is to say, the old-fashioned matchlock guns such as the musket muskets used by musketeers were gradually replaced with more advanced spring-fired muskets. Since Leonardo da Vinci and others made simple carbon spring steel, it has become easier to make springs and springs. The elasticity and toughness of spring steel are more suitable for making springs. The emergence of this material has greatly improved the yield rate of spring making. Before the emergence of spring steel, Italian craftsmen made springs by repeatedly heating and hammering a pig iron rod. During the heating and forging, impurities in the pig iron were removed to make it transition from pig iron to steel. This is a physical process. In ancient China, this is the so-called forging pig iron into fine iron process, which is very labor-intensive and material-intensive. It takes a long time to forge this iron rod, and finally it is forged into a slender iron ruler. At this time, this iron ruler can no longer be considered pig iron. Because, during the heating and forging, a lot of carbon elements are consumed, which reduces the carbon content of pig iron, turning the iron ruler into a steel ruler. Then, the craftsman heats this iron ruler at high temperature. After heating, it is bent and fixed on a fixed workbench, and then wound into a coil with difficulty. Then, it is placed in an annealing furnace for stress relief annealing. But the premise is that there is no problem with the steel ruler. Because it is purely hand-forged and decarbonized, it is difficult to control the carbon content of the steel ruler. After all, it is difficult to control the quality of hot forging decarbonization. Therefore, the yield rate of using pig iron bars to make clockwork is very low, generally less than 10%. Among them, the most difficult part is to hot forge the pig iron bars into steel rulers with appropriate carbon content. Only steel rulers that meet the quality standards are suitable for clockwork. The subsequent bending and annealing processes are not complicated. Therefore, such a low yield rate, this is still the yield rate of skilled craftsmen, has caused the price of clockwork to remain high. Moreover, even if you know how clockwork is made, it is difficult for craftsmen who have not been immersed in this for many years to make it successfully. Because it is too difficult to control the carbon content of the iron ruler by manual hot forging, which requires extremely rich experience. However, after Marin made ordinary carbon spring steel, the biggest problem in making clockwork, the material problem, was directly solved. Therefore, the first stage, which was extremely difficult for the craftsman, the stage of forging the iron ruler, was directly replaced by casting the iron ruler. Then, simply forging for a while, to make the structure of the steel ruler more solid and compact, it can be used to roll the clockwork. After repeated experiments by the craftsman, Marin found that after using spring steel, the process of making clockwork became simple, and the yield rate increased from less than 10% of hot forging with pig iron bars to more than 80%. In this way, the manufacturing cost and manufacturing time of the clockwork were greatly reduced. Of course, this process took a long time, and the craftsman did it after repeated verification. Just when Marin was busy presiding over the spring plowing, the clockwork casting workshop came to announce the good news. Marin was naturally overjoyed. The greatly reduced cost of clockwork meant a great reduction in cost. In this way, the conditions for the large-scale installation of clockwork flint guns were met. Of course, Marin did not forget to keep it secret. After rewarding the craftsmen with a large sum of money, the craftsmen and their families were moved to a small town specially for confidential units to live in. This is somewhat similar to the military-industrial units established by the Republic in the mountains and deserts of the Midwest later, which are very confidential. Moreover, people of this era have low requirements for spiritual and cultural life. As long as they are well fed and clothed every day, the craftsmen and their families will be satisfied. After calculation, the cost of springs has been reduced by about 7 times after the application of spring steel and new spring production technology. Although the cost of spring muskets is still much higher than that of matchlock guns, it is of great significance. Why? Because the matchlock of the matchlock gun makes it very inconvenient to use the gun. In order to prevent the sparks on the matchlock from igniting the gunpowder of the comrades around them, the distance between the matchlock gunners in the Spanish phalanx must reach 1 meter. Otherwise, there will be major safety hazards. The 1 meter distance between each musketeer does enhance safety. However, it also reduces the shooting density. After all, the 1 meter interval in the middle can almost fit 1 more musketeer. Therefore, after the flintlock replaced the matchlock, because they were all smoothbore guns, the range did not change, but the shooting density of the musketeers increased greatly. Even the musketeers using the flintlock could do a high-density 3-row volley shooting method of standing in the back row, bending in the middle, and squatting in the front row. Even if the hit rate of the smoothbore gun is very low, the hit rate is very high when the 3 rows of musketeers just shoot together. The clockwork musket is the same as the flintlock, without the matchlock, so it doesn't matter to keep a distance of 1 meter from each other. Therefore, if the clockwork musket is used on a large scale, the high-density Q shooting of the flintlock can also be achieved. In this way, the lethality of the musketeers will be improved to a certain extent. Another point is that the clockwork musket is not afraid of wind and rain. As long as you pay attention to cover the gunpowder when loading the bullet so that it doesn't get wet in the rain, you can completely expose the musket to the wind and rain when shooting. In history, the Black Shirt Knights relied on the characteristics of the clockwork musket that was not afraid of wind and rain to beat the French knights and flee in embarrassment. The reason why Marin replaced the musketeers with clockwork muskets was to increase the density of shooting and to prevent rainy weather. The weather in England is different from that in Germany. Because it faces the warm current of the Atlantic Ocean, the climate in England is relatively humid and it rains frequently. Once it rains, the musket will be completely scrapped and become a fire stick. In fact, Ireland is the real face of the warm current of the North Atlantic Ocean, so the western part of the island of Ireland is very humid, and there is too much rain to be suitable for agriculture, so it can only be used for grazing. Only the rain shadow area, in the east, that is, near Dublin, is suitable for agriculture. The island of England is suitable for agriculture because the island of Ireland blocks the water vapor of the Atlantic Ocean. But even so, England has more rain than Germany and a more humid climate. If it is a siege, Marin can also make a shooting awning on the city wall to help the musket block the wind and rain. But now Marin is the attacking party, and the army needs to move frequently. There is no condition to make a shooting awning, and it is not convenient to carry. Therefore, a musket like a clockwork musket that is not afraid of wind and rain and can increase the density of firing is the best choice. However, due to the high manufacturing cost, Marin only equipped the Black Shirt Knights and did not equip the infantry musketeers. Now that the cost and rapid mass production technical problems have been solved, Marin has decided to increase production capacity in mass-produce spring flintlocks to completely replace matchlock guns. However, this takes some time. After all, it takes time to make clockwork. Therefore, among the 20,000 troops attacking England this time, only the musketeers of the 1st Legion, that is, Marin's old main legion, began to replace the clockwork muskets. As for the English Legion in Saqqara, the musket equipment rate was not high, and there were still many archers. Therefore, it is not allowed to replace the clockwork muskets for the time being. Besides, because of the urgency of time, Marin could not come up with enough clockwork to replace the clockwork muskets for the English Legion. With enough breastplate armor and iron helmets to withstand bows and arrows, and enough clockwork muskets that are not afraid of wind and rain and can increase the density of shooting, Marin feels that it should not be a big problem to confront the 7,000 English longbowmen head-on, even in the rainy and foggy weather in England. Chapter 637, Artillery Doctrine. In fact, Marin knew very well that as long as the clockwork flintlock was slightly modified, a flintlock with lower cost and more convenient use could be made. Although the clockwork flintlock was not afraid of wind and rain, it needed to be wound up with a small wrench before firing, which would delay it for 2 or 3 seconds. Unlike the flintlock, you can wait for the trigger to fire by pushing it back. So, no matter how you look at it, the flintlock is better than the clockwork flintlock. However, Marin knew clearly that the flintlock had low technical content and low cost, and it was easy to be imitated by opponents. Therefore, even if he knew how to make a flintlock, Marin did not intend to launch the flintlock. Because once it was launched, it was easy for the enemy to imitate it, and then use the flintlock to hit himself. The clockwork flintlock was different. The clockwork was difficult to manufacture and the cost was very high. When others did not have spring steel, the clockwork could only be made by hand, and the yield rate was extremely low. In this way, it was very costly for others to manufacture clockwork flintlocks. Even if they knew the structure and principle of the clockwork flintlock and successfully imitated it, they could not be equipped on a large scale due to the high cost. On the contrary, because Marin has the technology of carbon spring steel, the cost of manufacturing springs is low, the qualified rate of finished products is high, and the manufacturing speed is fast, which is convenient for large-scale installation. Therefore, Marin deliberately used the inferior spring musket, hoping to prevent those poor opponents from large-scale installation through cost advantages and technical advantages. In this way, the opponent's firepower is definitely not as good as his own. Of course, other countries can also choose to install muskets. But the shortcomings of the musket are too obvious. The shooting density is low, and it will be broken when encountering wind and rain. Therefore, using the same musket, the musket line array will definitely not be able to beat the line array of the spring musket. Because the musketeers using the spring musket can stand shoulder to shoulder and shoot at the opponent with a shooting density nearly twice the density of the opponent's line array. Although the shooting accuracy of the smoothbore musket is touching, the density is large, and the possibility of hitting the opponent is greater. However, just replacing the musket with a spring musket is still not an advantage in the face of the British Army. Why? Because the opponent's long-range firepower is also very strong. Although it is a bow and arrow, in fact, the lethality of the English longbow is by no means inferior to that of the musket. Even when neither side wears plate armor, the lethality of the English longbowman is stronger. Because the shooting rate of the English longbowman is much faster. Generally speaking, the shooting rate of the English longbowman is 12 arrows per minute, and when all the arrows are fired, it can reach 15 arrows per minute. When using a musket, whether it is a matchlock gun or a clockwork musket, it takes 30 seconds to fire a shot because of the difficulty of loading, that is, 2 shots per minute. Of course, through the 3-stage shooting method, it can be increased to 6 shots per minute. However, facing the opponent's shooting rate of 12 arrows per minute, it is still greatly at a disadvantage. If you don't wear plate armor, facing the rain of arrows from the English longbow, you will definitely suffer heavy casualties. Even if you wear plate armor, there will be certain casualties. Because no matter which army, it is impossible to wear plate armor for the entire army. After all, wearing plate armor also requires strong physical strength and endurance. Even if Marin put breastplates and iron helmets on the front row soldiers, and equipped the back row soldiers with iron helmets and wood armor, there would definitely be casualties. After all, even the front row soldiers did not wear plate armor on their lower body. If they were unlucky, they might get shot in the legs. And the soldiers behind would be fine if the arrows hit the iron helmets. If they shot through the gaps between the iron helmets and hit the neck or chest, they would be finished. Therefore, relying on muskets alone would not have much advantage, and other methods must be considered. Marin began to recall the plot of the 100 Years' War between England and France, and finally, he remembered that the reason why the French army was able to turn the tables in the end seemed to be mainly due to 2 things, artillery and plate armor. Needless to say, plate armor has sufficient defense against bows and arrows. The reason why the British Army won many victories in the early days was that plate armor had not yet appeared in the 14th century, and chain armor was still popular at the time, which naturally could not stop the English longbow. In the 15th century, with the development of plate armor technology, the French army gradually had the ability to fight back. In the case that war horses were easily hit by arrows, the French knights simply dismounted and charged as plate-armored infantry, with good results. Of course, the main role was played by artillery. Because the long-range firepower was far inferior to that of the British Army, the French began to develop artillery to fight against the British Army after entering the 15th century. Although the artillery technology was average at the time, the range was only more than 200 meters. But this was enough because the range of the English longbowmen was only more than 200 yards. Moreover, the lethality of artillery is much greater than that of bows and arrows. Although the English longbowman can shoot more than 200 yards. However, if it exceeds 100 yards, the power of the arrow will be greatly reduced, and it will almost lose its armor-piercing ability. Artillery is different. Even if such a large iron ball is thrown far away, the kinetic energy provided by the mass of the iron ball itself can also smash the opponent into shit. Not only that, wherever the iron ball shells pass, as long as they do not miss, they will kill more than one person. A 3-pound iron ball cannonball, wherever it flies, will smash the opponent's head. If it hits the arm, it will break the arm. If it hits the leg, it will break the leg. If it hits the chest, it will directly smash a big bloody hole and then continue to smash the next unlucky person. If it is fired at a crowded place, an iron ball cannonball can always take away several enemies. The French were ruthless and mobilized dozens or hundreds of artillery to participate in the war in the later period of the war. Hundreds of cannons fired at the same time, taking away hundreds of English longbowmen at a time. The English suffered a big loss, because it is extremely difficult to train English longbowmen. A longbowman not only needs to have a tall stature, height over 1.75 meters, but also needs more than 10 years of uninterrupted practice. In order to allow young people to have enough time to practice archery, the King of England declared playing football illegal, because young people playing football will squeeze out the time for practicing archery. In this way, after many years of uninterrupted practice, the King of England recruited thousands of longbowmen from the people. How could the English not collapse when such difficult-to-train longbowmen were taken away by hundreds of French artillery fire in one round? You know, longbowmen are difficult to replenish because of their high requirements. Therefore, the number of longbowmen in England became fewer and fewer. After the quantitative change caused qualitative change, the French finally gained the upper hand in the later period and drove the British army out of the European continent. Marin felt that the French ideas were very clever and worth learning from. Therefore, this time, Marin also decided to use artillery as the main means of attack, using intensive artillery fire to kill a large number of English longbowmen. Marin originally had 50 front-loading 3-pound cannons, plus more than 50 Saxon rear-loading bronze cannons, flanger cannons, seized in the Battle of Lübeck. Therefore, Marin also had the ability to mobilize hundreds of infantry cannons to bombard the British longbowmen crazily. Although the range of the François cannons seized from the Saxons was the same as that of the French artillery, only more than 200 meters, unlike the front-loading 3-pound cannon, which had a range of 365 meters. However, this was enough to kill a large number of English longbowmen. As long as the artillery ship was equipped with plate armor, the British longbow projectiles could be fully resisted. Even if the English longbowmen wore plate armor, they could not withstand the bombardment of iron ball shells. As long as 100 artillery pieces caused enough casualties to the English longbowmen, the morale of the enemy would surely plummet. At that time, the whole army would charge forward and completely defeat the British army. As a half-fan of Napoleon, Marin also advocated big artilleryism. In fact, the later Republic of China also pursued big artilleryism. In 1979, the Chinese army fired 1.06 million shells in 28 days to fight against the U-monkeys, an average of 37,800 shells per day, which shook the earth. It is said that once a leader suspected that there were U-monkeys ambushing in a certain col, so he asked the artillery to fire 10,000 shells into the colonel. Afterwards, the scouts went over and found that there were more than 800 U-monkey soldiers dead in the tunnel. Moreover, they were not killed by the explosion, but were killed by the shock wave of the explosion of the continuous shells, which made their ears, noses and throats bleed. To use Jean Dacia's description, he was killed by the shock of internal energy, and his 7 orifices bled. Marin actually advocated this kind of unreasonable fighting style, but unfortunately, saltpeter was limited and gunpowder was not particularly sufficient. Therefore, he had to use it sparingly. But when Chilean saltpeter was developed, Marin decided to let the shells fly freely, and whoever did not obey would be smashed into dust with tens of thousands of shells. Chapter 638, Cement Ball Cannonball. Although it is very pleasant to bombard people with artillery, Marin found a problem. The 50 Franco rear-loading bronze cannons seized from the army of the Electorate of Saxony are not of uniform caliber. Some of these 50 Franco rear-loading bronze cannons are 2-pound cannons, some are 3-pound cannons, and there are 4-pound cannons with mixed calibers. Moreover, even with the same caliber, there are slight differences due to the casting process. Therefore, if the captured Franco rear-loading cannons are used in combat, matching ammunition needs to be manufactured. Fortunately, it is not difficult to cast artillery shells. As long as there is a template artillery shell with a high degree of fit, the same artillery shell can be cast using the sand casting method. Although there must be some honeycombs in the cannon shells cast in wet sand because of water vapor, it has no effect because it is a cannon shell, not a gun barrel. Anyway, it is used to hit people, and the iron ball cannon shells must be harder than the human body even if there are honeycombs. If it hits, it must be the end of the person. Moreover, what surprised Marin was that according to the captured Saxon artillerymen, many of the Saxon artillery used stone bullets instead of iron balls. Because the current European iron smelting technology is backward, most blacksmiths still use the method of directly reducing iron or on a pile of red-hot charcoal to smelt iron. Therefore, the price of iron in Europe is still very expensive. Therefore, it is also good to use stone shells instead of iron ball shells. Stone shells. It seems that the power is not enough, and it can't hit the city wall. Marin muttered. However, he soon realized that the infantry artillery is to hit people, not to attack the city, and it is not necessary to use iron balls. Stone shells are definitely enough. However, for Marin, producing stone shells is more troublesome than producing iron ball shells. To produce iron ball shells, you only need to use a model standard shell to press out space in the sandbox divided into two halves, then separate the two halves of the sandbox, put them together, and pour molten iron from the casting hole above, and you can quickly cast shells of the same size. If you use stone shells, you need to use stonemasons to grind them manually. Although stonemasons can also grind stone shells to the same size as iron ball shells, it is very time-consuming and not as fast as the sand casting method. Other countries use stone bullets because iron balls are too expensive, but Marin doesn't care. He has an iron blast furnace, uses coke to smelt iron, and imports hematite from Luxembourg to smelt iron, so there is plenty of molten iron. Therefore, he doesn't care about the cost of iron balls. Moreover, grinding stone ball shells is too time-consuming and inefficient. Therefore, Marin still plans to use iron ball shells mainly. However, one day, after seeing workers building cement roads in the city, Marin immediately changed his mind. Why? Because Marin thought of using cement to cast shells. Yes, cement to cast shells. Stone shells are difficult to grind because stonemasons are needed and it takes a lot of time. But cement is easier. After thinking about it, Marin thought that he could make two iron bowls that can be put together. Then, put the mixed cement into the iron bowl. After a while, when the cement balls can no longer fall apart, separate the iron bowls on both sides and take out the cement balls to air dry or sun dry. Then, a cement ball shell was born. It is indeed a bit wasteful for infantry artillery to use iron balls to hit people. Anyway, it is just hitting people, and there is not much difference between iron balls and cement balls. Moreover, how cheap are cement balls? It is very convenient to cast, which can save a lot of money compared to using iron balls. Marin immediately found a craftsman and cast an iron bowl divided into two halves, which was specially used to cast cement ball shells. However, the processing of the iron bowl seems to be a bit difficult. After all, it is an iron thing, and it is troublesome to make a mold. Later, a craftsman simply suggested why not use a wooden bowl. The wooden bowl can also shape the cement, and it is easy to process the wooden bowl, and the carpenter can make fine adjustments at any time. Unlike the iron bowl, if the casting fails, it is very difficult to modify. As for the wooden bowl, the carpenter can adjust it by knocking it with an axe and chisel for a while. If it doesn't work, just change a wooden bowl. Wood is not worth much. After a few days of hard work, a method of using two hemispherical wooden bowls together to fix the cement cast shells was born. As long as there is cement, casting cement ball shells is not too simple. Just pour cement into the bowl, force the two hemispheres together, and squeeze out the excess cement. Then wait for an hour or two. The cement in the bowl is almost not easy to fall apart, and then remove the two halves of the wooden bowl, so that the cement ball is exposed to the sun or dried in the sun or air. A cement ball shell is completed. After the cement ball is dry and hard, after testing, it is not particularly different from a stone shell. Anyway, it is enough to use it to hit people. After all, when the human body and the cement ball collide head-on, the human body will definitely suffer. Even if the cement ball is broken, it doesn't matter. After all, cement is not worth money. If it is gone, you can just get a few new ones. Even if there is a gap, it doesn't matter. Put some cement on the gap part, and it can continue to be used as a shell after it dries. But people are different. If you are hit by a cement ball shell, you will either die or be disabled. Wearing plate armor is useless. That kind of kinetic energy, even if it doesn't penetrate the plate armor, can break your bones and kill you. Marin called his men over and showed them this low-cost cement ball shell. Kohler, the Minister of Finance, liked this low-cost shell at first sight. As Marin's confidant, Kohler knew how low the cost of cement was. At least, it was much lower than iron balls. Because, to make iron balls, you need to import hematite from Luxembourg, and then smelt it into molten iron through the equipment and craftsmen of the steel plant. Finally, it is cast one by the craftsmen who cast sand. After a series of costs, it is much higher than cement shells. And what about cement ball shells? Just find a construction worker, stir the cement, and then take out the mold wooden bowl. No craftsmanship is required. Ordinary construction workers can produce this kind of shells. It is very simple. Although Marin said that iron balls are still needed for bombarding city walls and naval artillery battles. However, switching infantry artillery to cement ball shells can definitely save a lot of money. For Finance Minister Kohler, nothing is more important than saving money. As for the problem that cement ball shells are easily damaged by bumps and bumps, just as Marin had planned before, bring a few construction workers with the army, and bring some cement and yellow sand. If the recycled cement ball shells have gaps, mix some cement and apply it to the gaps of the shells, dry them in the sun, blow them, and a new infantry shell is out. Marin is very proud of his original invention. It seems that there have been no cement shells in history. However, this is no wonder. Because when cement appeared, in the 19th century, solid shells had been eliminated, and it was already the world of shrapnel shells. So, naturally no one thought of using cement to cast shells. After all, cement can only be made into solid shells like stone ball shells, not shrapnel shells. Therefore, the cement ball shells made by Marin are really original. Moreover, because other countries do not have cement, if they want to copy, they must first master cement technology. Chapter 639 Spring Plowing on Manhattan Island. After testing, Marin found that pouring cement directly into the bowls on both sides did not seem to make the cement ball shells compact enough. So, Marin and the craftsmen worked hard to improve the method of making cement ball shells. Specifically, let people use the method of kneading dough to knead a cement ball larger than the specified shell with cement, and compact it desperately. Then, put it into the two halves of the wooden bowl, and press it hard again to squeeze out the excess cement. In this way, after 2 compressions, the structure of the cement ball shell is very compact. After a while, remove the bowl. Because it is compacted, it does not need to be removed after an hour or so, but can be removed quickly. Dry the cement ball in the sun or blow dry, and the cement ball shell obtained is not much different from the stone ball shell. This way of pouring cement balls to make shells is not too simple. After the experiment, Marin found that as long as the wooden bowl of the seat mold is provided, any construction worker can produce hundreds of cement ball shells a day, with low cost and simple process. Unlike casting iron ball shells, it requires an iron factory and a large number of craftsmen. Moreover, casting iron ball shells is very dangerous because molten iron can burn people to death. If you are not careful, molten iron will splash on people. And to produce cement ball shells, any construction worker can open the cement bag, mix the cement, take out the mold wooden bowl, and start mass production of cement ball shells. The cost is low, and the production is convenient and fast. There is no need for a special site. Just find a place in the wild and mix a pile of cement to mass produce shells. Oh my God, it sounds terrible. In order to make the shells stronger, Marin also asked people to add tough thatch to the cement balls when kneading them as the bones of cement concrete. Although it is not as strong as reinforced concrete, it is much better than not using it. Just when Marin and a group of craftsmen were developing cement ball shells, Albert, the governor of the North American colonies and the Twin Islands of North America, was directing the immigrants to start a vigorous spring plowing in the North American colonies. Because of the experience of being almost killed by an arrow last time, the young Albert matured a lot all of a sudden. After recovering from his injury, Albert seemed to have changed into a different person. He became more calm and careful. In the past, Albert saw his brother Marin wearing plate armor every time he went out, and he laughed at Marin for being timid. However, after the last experience of almost dying, Albert finally understood Marin's approach. If he had worn breastplate armor last time, then the inferior earth bow and arrow of the natives would not have caused him any harm. Albert didn't know that Marin was killed by a brick in his previous life. People who had died once naturally cherished their lives more and were more careful. Therefore, every time Marin went out, he would wear breastplate armor and a helmet. In addition, there were a group of strong men around him, ready to block guns and arrows for him at any time. Although I don't know what Marin really thinks, after the last incident, Albert also began to cherish his life. Before, Albert, who liked the civil service style more, always wore silk robes and looked more like a civil servant. But after the last incident, Albert began to pay attention to his own safety. After all, if you can't change after suffering a loss once, you are stupid. Now, when Albert went out to inspect the spring plowing, although he was still wearing a silk robe on the outside, he was wearing a steel vest inside. In addition, although the hat on his head was also in the style of a civil servant, it was also padded with steel plates, high-carbon steel plates. It is worth mentioning that the focus of this year's spring plowing on the 2 islands in North America has shifted to Manhattan Island, which was bought from the Delaware people. Although the total area of Amerigo Island and Columbus Island is much larger than that of Manhattan Island, the fresh water resources on the two small islands are far less than that of Manhattan Island. Why? Because Manhattan Island is a long island located in the middle of the Hudson River. Although it is also surrounded by water, Amerigo Island and Columbus Island are surrounded by sea water. The agriculture on the island depends on the small river with priority fresh water resources on the island. Manhattan Island is also surrounded by water, but it is surrounded by fresh water on all sides, which is very convenient for planting. Therefore, Albert directly moved the governor's mansion to Manhattan Island and cultivated on a large scale on Manhattan Island, intending to turn the 59 square kilometers of Manhattan Island into an agricultural island. In this era, irrigated land along the river is a treasure in Europe. Because, if you install a large water wheel by the river, irrigation does not require manpower, which is very convenient. In Europe, irrigated land by the big river is generally used to grow high-value wheat. Only land not near the big river will grow rye. After all, the price difference between wheat and rye is several times. Manhattan Island is a long island at the mouth of the Hudson River. The entire island is flat and easy to get water, which is very suitable for irrigation. Therefore, Albert simply built more than a dozen large water wheels on the riverside of the island and used natural water power for irrigation. For safety, Albert also built a small castle in the center of Manhattan Island as the governor's mansion. In addition, 5 bunkers were built around Manhattan Island for vigilance to avoid attacks by Indians. Under the protection of the 5 bunkers, the farmers on the island began to work hard. The farmers on the island were all brought by Albert from Cape Breton Island. Before, Marin transported tens of thousands of English refugees to Cape Breton Island. Albert thought it was too wasteful, so he asked Garland for a few thousand people. It just so happened that there was not much labor on Cape Breton Island, so Garland sent thousands of immigrants to Albert. It was absolutely enough for thousands of people to develop a small island of only 59 square kilometers. It just so happened that Marin transported a lot of cattle imported from Crimea to Albert. With sufficient manpower and oxen, Albert directly began to develop Manhattan Island. Marin also agreed to this. After all, only by developing Manhattan Island can the Grand Duchy of the North Sea truly have a foothold in the North American continent. The previous Cape Breton Island, the North American Twin Islands and Newfoundland Island were all suspended overseas. Only by gaining a foothold on Manhattan Island can it be considered to have reached into the North American continent. Because there is sufficient labor and oxen, and the long Manhattan Island is very rich in freshwater resources. Therefore, Albert directly decided to grow wheat on a large scale on Manhattan Island. Wheat is a high-value agricultural product. 1 pound of wheat can be sold for 5 pfennigs in Germany and 1 shilling in Spain. It is a luxury in the grain industry and a favorite of the nobility. After all, white bread made of soft wheat flour is a symbol of nobility. The best queen bread with honey, butter and spices can only be enjoyed by the great nobles. Albert is very economically minded. He knows that if wheat is planted all over Manhattan Island, when the wheat harvest comes, the wheat will be shipped back to Europe, which is much more expensive than selling rye. Of course, due to his age and experience, Albert does not know how to be low-key and hidden. Unlike Marin, he is more cautious. Even if there are a lot of rye, he dare not sell it openly. Otherwise, he will definitely be beaten up by a group and forced to hand over the secrets of high agricultural yield. Fortunately, Manhattan Island is not big, and it is only about 10,000 acres of arable land after development. It is impossible to be all arable land. There are also building area, ditch area, and roads. That is 60,000 acres. Even if all wheat is planted and the yield is high, it will only be about 30 million pounds of wheat. This amount of scale, even if it is put into the European market, it will not make too much waves and will not attract attention. Unlike Marin's rye, which easily costs more than £1 billion, if it is put on the market on a large scale, it is estimated that the price of rye can be reduced by half. But if this is true, Marin is estimated to be beaten up by the whole of Europe soon. But no matter what, the value that 60,000 acres of wheat fields can create is indeed very high. At 5 pfennig per pound, 30 million pounds of wheat can be exchanged for 150 million pfennigs, or 2.5 million gold coins, which is very scary. Because this is higher than the annual fiscal revenue of the Republic of Venice, and twice the annual fiscal revenue of France. Chapter 640, Good intentions lead to wrong things. When the spring plowing was almost halfway done, Albert proudly wrote a report on his wheat planting on Manhattan Island and submitted it back to his country by ship. A month later, after receiving Albert's report, Marin almost fainted. Why? Albert was still too young. There was nothing wrong with the idea of planting wheat and selling it for a lot of money, and there was no problem with Manhattan Island being suitable for growing wheat. However, there was a problem with the planting time. What was the problem? The European wheat variety was not good, and the growing period was too long. Therefore, the current wheat in Europe is generally planted in November of the first year and harvested in October of the following year. In other words, the growing period of European wheat is almost a year. Even if enough potassium fertilizer is used to shorten the growth cycle, it still takes 7 or 8 months. And now it is March or April, and 7 or 8 months later, it is just early winter. Damn it, is there still heat absorption when it matures in winter? You know, there is nothing wrong with the early growth of grains, but during the heading and maturity period, it needs to absorb a lot of light energy, temperature and water for photosynthesis. Therefore, the growth and harvest period of grains are generally in summer or autumn, that is, summer harvest and autumn harvest. Because there is enough sunlight in summer and autumn, and the temperature is suitable. However, Marin has never heard that grain can be harvested in winter. So, Albert's business this time was a failure. The idea was good, but the matter was messed up. Marin was very angry at first why the people around Albert did not remind him, but when he thought about it, it seemed that the helpers Albert brought were all young people and had little experience. Moreover, most people in North Germany grow rye and rarely grow wheat. So it is normal not to know. It is normal for a group of inexperienced young people to make some jokes. Fortunately, the planting area promoted by Albert this time is only the small island of Manhattan Island. Even if there is no harvest, it doesn't matter. After all, according to the report, the 2 islands of North America and Cape Breton Island are still mainly planted with rye. At most, this year, it will cost food to feed thousands of immigrants on Manhattan Island for nothing. This is nothing to Marin, who has so much food. In fact, one of the important purposes of Marin to send people to the Ming dynasty is to introduce wheat varieties from there. After all, Marin remembered that there has always been a tradition of rice and wheat rotation in the Jianghuai region. That is, winter wheat and rice are sown alternately, with 2 crops a year. During this period, the winter wheat varieties in the Jianghuai region should be perfected, and they are just introduced to replace the long-growing wheat in Europe. If there is wheat with a short growth period, then it seems that the New York area can also have 2 crops a year. Of course, due to the high latitude, rice may not be suitable. However, the rotation of winter wheat and soybeans is possible. Marin remembered that in his hometown in the past life, after the winter wheat was harvested, the large fields were mainly planted with rice. And some small fields were sometimes planted with soybeans. Then, around the Mid-Autumn Festival, soybeans were about to be harvested. Before they are fully mature and become soybeans, the green soybeans that are about to mature are the legendary edamame. Every Mid-Autumn Festival, in addition to eating moon cakes, Marin's hometown in his previous life also popularized eating edamame, water chestnuts and taro. Moreover, edamame boiled in salt water is cooked in one pot, which is very delicious. Marin remembered that every Mid-Autumn Festival in his previous life, he and his brother would fight fiercely over edamame. Of course, I am small, and I always fall behind. After the Mid-Autumn Festival, the green edamame will mature and become the legendary soybean. After the harvest, the land is plowed and winter wheat is planted. Rice has high climate requirements and is generally planted in warm areas. But there is no problem planting soybeans in the New York area. Because, Marin clearly remembers that in later generations, Canada, which has a higher latitude than New York, is an important soybean-producing area in the world. Of course, the rotation of winter wheat and soybeans is just an ideal plan in Marin's mind. In fact, the growth cycle of Indian soybeans that Marin has now seems to be a little longer than that of later varieties. And if the winter wheat varieties introduced from the Ming dynasty are also longer than those in later generations, then the rotation of winter wheat and soybeans seems to be impossible. But it doesn't matter, because as long as Marin occupies the North American colonies, the least lacking thing is land. If you can't have 2 crops a year, then you can have 1 crop a year. Anyway, there is plenty of land. Let's not talk about anything else, but the area of the Hudson River Basin is as high as 34,000 square kilometers. Even if only half of it is suitable for farming, it is equivalent to 25 million mu. If it is reduced by 10 times, even if it is 2.5 million mu, it is very scary. The only trouble is where do so many people come from to farm? You know, without a tractor, relying on manpower to farm, a family can only grow 100 mu at most. 2.5 million mu requires 25,000 households to plant. That's more than 100,000 people. Marin is worried about whether there are so many people. In the end, Marin did not reprimand Albert. Because, that's his younger brother. Besides, although Albert made a big mistake this time, it was unintentional, which is a typical case of good intentions doing bad things. After all, he grew up in a rye-producing area and had never seen wheat planting, so he naturally didn't know the details. Unlike Marin, who has 2 lifetimes of experience, he can understand so much. In fact, Marin himself was a little unconsidered to let a young man who was only 21 years old suddenly take up a high-level position such as governor. Moreover, he has not yet been equipped with an experienced senior deputy. So, Marin didn't say anything about Albert's mistake this time. He was not allowed to switch back to planting rye, because it was too late. It takes a month to sail from America to the mainland. It takes more than 2 months from the mainland to North America. With such a long time, it is impossible to stop Albert from planting wheat on Manhattan Island. In fact, this is also Marin's work mistake. Because Marin did not equip Albert with a capable assistant. And the men who originally followed Terra also followed Terra when Terra changed his post to Cuba because a large number of people were needed. Therefore, Albert himself, including the team he formed, are too young, and it is inevitable to make mistakes. Without affecting the overall situation, Marin chose to forgive Albert's mistakes. Of course, although Marin would not punish Albert, he still wrote a letter pointing out Albert's mistakes and asked him to find a way to remedy them. The autumn harvest is over, but what to plant next is also very important. If Albert insists on continuing to plant wheat, then the wheat planted before must be shoveled before November. Because November is the season for planting wheat. Only by freeing up space can the wheat varieties that grow for a long time in Europe be replanted. In this way, a large amount of wheat can be harvested next year to make up for this loss. As for food, it is necessary to temporarily rely on the Twin Islands and Cape Breton Island. In addition, there is a surplus of labor on Cape Breton Island. After all, Cape Breton Island is an island with a higher latitude, and its geographical environment is far inferior to that of New York, which has a lower latitude. Therefore, Marin ordered Garland to give another 10,000 English immigrants to Albert, so that Albert can strengthen the development of the New York area. Areas that are too inland can be ignored for the time being, but the greater New York area, that is, the area at the mouth of the Hudson River, must be developed. In later generations, the area of New York City reached 789 square kilometers and the population reached 8.51 million. Of course, that is a super city made up of high-rise buildings. If it is changed to a village, it is estimated that it can accommodate tens of thousands of people. Of course, this is enough. With a settlement of tens of thousands of people, Marin's power can have a foothold on the North American continent. In the future, this foothold will be used as a springboard to continue to expand inland. But first, Albert needs to bribe the local Delaware people and agree to their large-scale development in that area of New York City. For this, Marin was willing to pay a price. Of course, in addition to horses and weapons, Marin didn't mind giving some of the other things to the friendly Delaware people.